I think there's a fair bit I'm going to go through here. Some of it's sort of like historical, just to give you an idea of how Blackwater Re-use has progressed over the years. By informing you, it hopefully will stimulate you and give your mind some ideas, because often technocrats can, they can see the trees but they can't see the forest. And I know of many instances where the public have alerted organisations like Sydney Water and others to things that they just hadn't seen themselves. Okay, so everyone should know that as Wentworth Falls Lake and one of those American helicopters. Turns out that lake's probably a very secure source of water. This is Canberra in 2000, just after 2003. You might recall they had lost about 500 or 600 houses. And so that's what we're trying to avoid, disasters like that. What is Blackwater recycling? How's it been done? Where and why? And can it be integrated with drought fireproofing? Now, the risk of fire spread in urban areas can be prepared for by retaining moisture in the green spaces, which was just covered by, in parts by various people's comments and Dr. Allen's presentation. You can see here, this is a recycled water meter and a drinking water meter, and someone's liberally irrigating their lawn. Under fire conditions, it's often at a period towards the end of a drought or in drought, where rainwater tanks are often empty. There's typically water restrictions applying to the drinking water supply. That might be intermittent, occasional hand watering for houses, but sometimes councils are not even allowed to irrigate their open space. So that limits the ability to keep the green space green. Now, for the Blue Mountains, this is potentially worse because the upper Blue Mountains water supply is reliant on just those little catchments up at Blackheath and Medlow Bath. Now, I'm not saying that it's not a relatively secure supply. It's just that as you go into climatic variability, it just doesn't have the multiple sources that you have of the main Sydney metropolitan supply. And that became apparent in the 2005-2007 drought period, where there wasn't a huge amount of water left. So that's a possibility that I know the Blue Mountains Council are cognizant of. Fortunately, at that time, you didn't have the 2019 fire conditions occurring at the same time as that low level of water supply. Now, firefighting water. Okay, so you've got the preparation, now you've got the firefighting water. You need the water while the fire is happening. That can be obtained by the drinking water supply. But under duress of emergency, you've got water restrictions. They're probably going to be thrown out the window. People are just going to get whatever water they can. You're going to have people opening every hydrant trying to fill some lake at, Blackheath, but Mark solved that problem. Yes, so you've got this issue of can you rely on this water supply? Now, the Blue Mountains water supply is linear. It's not like typical water systems where you can rezone areas if there's a lack of water, bring in water from other reservoirs, opening valves and that. It's a linear supply. There's really only one pathway for water, and the stakes are really high with this system. Multiple breakdown points, lack of power, not being able to transfer water from one reservoir to the next. Well, we've got wastewater flowing underneath the ground all over the place in the Blue Mountains all the time, even during a drought and even during bushfire conditions, well, at least up until when people are running away down the mountain and they've already prepared their house. So we'll get back to that later, and here we are here. What's Blackwater recycling? Okay, treating and reusing the kitchen and toilet wastewater from residences and commercial premises. So I guess you call it the richer mix of wastewater. That's all the wastewater without the grey water. Now this is a pretty old diagram, but as you can see, a typical house, you've got an outdoor tap. It can be fed with recycled water. Washing machine. Nowadays, since 2006, the recycled water schemes that there are in Sydney and in other places around Australia, typically you can actually use recycled water for the cold water in the washing machine. Laundry is typically fed from hot water and cold water, and grey water can come out of that. Kitchen, that's considered black water. Hand basin, grey water. Shower, grey water. Toilet, definitely black water. This shows like a grey water configuration. For the purposes of this talk, you can just assume that when we're referring to black water, I'm thinking wastewater, grey water and the black water combined. Full wastewater flow, black water and grey water. Now, when people say, oh, wastewater is like 99 point something or other % water, but it is true. I'd say grey water is more like 99.99% or more. Black water, you're talking about 99.75%. But that 0.2% is a real pain to get rid of, because it's got stuff in there that requires multiple processes to remove for the water to be useful for high value purposes such as toilet flushing or garden watering. Treatment for recycling black water has typically been done at a municipal regional scale, and we'll get onto the reasons why in a sec, but there has been some smaller scale stuff which I'll also touch on, which is my area of interest, and it's where there could be more of a future there. Plants with the recycled water usually have it piped back to residences and premises for garden watering, toilet flushing, wash down, and of course, as I mentioned, laundry use. And as of 2015, certainly Sydney waters, recycled water areas, the water can be used for veggie patches. Each end use is typically displacing a drinking water source, but there are other drivers, and that's what I'm going to get onto in a moment. So there's different things in that 0.25% of wastewater which we're going to get rid of. The main one's the food, like the food scraps and lots of the stuff and our human waste. That food that has got energy in it, and we basically rely on settling and biological methods to get rid of that. So letting the wastewater settle, sludge settles out, but there's still all the dirty water above, and we rely on bacteria to remove that, typically by aeration methods. Now there's nutrients in there, so especially phosphorus and nitrogen, they're the main nutrients. Phosphorus can be removed by biological methods, but basically it's chemical precipitation is usually what's used for phosphorus. And then nitrogen, there's no choice but biology. We have to use a combination of bacteria to do that in a different a bit of a complicated process. With all of this, in the process of trying to remove the food and the particulates from the wastewater, addressing the nutrients, that helps reduce the amount of pathogens in the wastewater. But once you've cleaned it up largely so it looks like drinking water, it looks clear, you still need to disinfect it. So there are human health and environmental risks associated with each use of recycled water. If you're just irrigating a golf course at night, for example, no one's around, it's at night, maybe you don't need to treat it to the same level as if you're watering effluent which is treated for garden watering, where there's aerosols and people could be breathing it in. So the government issued a really good, a range of professionals working together at a national level came up with these guidelines in 2006, which have been rolled out as regulations across the states in various forms to give us very good guidance on how to deal with this. Now, comprehensive, gives a lot of guidance and a lot of flexibility for particular end uses. Even though it's quite old, it's still very current as far as its applicability. People put all sorts of things down the sewer, and that's just reality. Kids put stuff down. So it has to be screened first to remove the gross solids, and then you've got this wastewater that is usually settled out, and then the sludge is taken away to digestion or some other disposal method, and then it needs that secondary aeration to break down that food and start to also eat up the nutrients. These two steps can sometimes be combined, sometimes there's whole different permutations and combinations of that. And then once that process, when it's bubbling away, it looks like a chocolate milkshake, except it's not crunchy. So then it's put into a clarifier, and the activated sludge, basically the bacteria, and other microorganisms, they settle out typically, and then that's put in through the sludge processes, and then you've got this clear water, usually needs to be filtered. Sometimes we're chemically dosing for phosphorus along the way, and then it needs to be disinfected for the higher grades of recycling, such as toilet flushing and garden watering. UV, chlorine contact tank, and off you go. This process here is something that's been the main go-to during the 20th century. It was developed in the early 20th century. Many of you would have probably seen the old trickling filters, those big tubs of rocks with the Hills hoist sort of thing rotating around, trickling. That was the earlier attached growth trickling filter method that was developed back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But this process here with modern aeration, air blower pumps to pump air in, and pumps and equipment, scraping equipment, we're able to adopt this approach to comprehensively treating wastewater basically all around the world. But in the last 20, 30 years, newer technologies have enabled a more compact version of this, and you'll hear talk in the small-scale recycled water space, small, medium-scale membrane bioreactors. What you have here is you have screening, and then the wastewater, these processes, basically all these processes here all happen in this one unit, and the wastewater is then sucked through membranes, and then you've got this clear effluent. So you've got rid of the food, you've got rid of a lot of the nutrients, and you've got rid of nearly all of the pathogens. Some still may get through, the viruses, not so much the bacteria, the small viruses. You've got to disinfect those. This has been a really good innovation in sort of making high-grade recycled water possible and affordable at a smaller scale, but it still has its issues. So where and why Blackwater recycling has been implemented? Okay. First one, golf courses. First major use was back in the 1960s. This is my understanding. Certainly the case in New South Wales. You had golf courses located close to existing wastewater treatment plants. The treatment was to at least a secondary biological level, so that's without going through an actual filter process, was a sufficient bit of disinfection. And why? The driver? I'm not a golfer, no pun intended. Affordable irrigation water for golf clubs. Now the water utilities were often providing the pipe to connect the plants on a cost recovery basis because they got something out of it. They just were able to produce, they could put less effluent into the waterways. I think during the 60s, the environmental consciousness was starting to really kick in. 1967 for Sydney, you had these particular golf courses. Now, another thing that's come on board, I'll introduce this term sewer mining because it relates to the Blue Mountains potential for recycled water. That's where you divert wastewater from the sewer and recycle it for an end use. And because you've taken the wastewater from the sewer and you might treat it to get the recycled water for your particular purpose, you've got the sludge and the soils and that sort of stuff. You don't have to put it in a digester and process it and then truck it away somewhere like what major plants need to have done to it. It can just be dumped back in the sewer and then that gets handled in the sewer system at the treatment plant. Now, for Sydney, you should be familiar. Does anyone know what this area here is? It is the Hills District, and within this is the north, this is the Rouse Hill development area, which kicked off in the early 1990s. That's the treatment plant. I might just quickly run through those treatment processes again here. Here you've got the original plant, and here you've got some new treatment units. This plant has been progressively expanded since the early 90s. So this is the aeration, sort of the primary sedimentation and secondary process aeration. Here you can see looks like it's all frothed up. It's intermittently aerated, depending on what bugs you want to use to reduce the nitrogen. And then the wastewater goes into clarifiers where it settles out, and the bugs settle out, and then the bugs are then pumped back up into here to the wastewater, the head of the works, to provide some seed bacteria to get the process going. Effluent comes out of the clarifiers and then is then subjected to filtration and then chlorination. I think I've got a slide here. There's the there's the filtration tanks. In fact, the water's so clear you can sort of see through it there. And this is before it's been filtered. So the water goes through these filters, deep bed filters, to make sure that the particles are fully removed. Sufficient particles are removed to get enough pathogen reduction to meet the guidelines for recycled water. And then you've got the chlorine contact tank, the serpentine route, where the chlorine is allowed time to kill off the bugs. In this plant, they built some wetlands to discharge in the effluent. This is the water reservoir that the effluent is pumped back up into. This is at Kellyville, so this is at the southern edge of the catchment, and the water is then reticulated into a second set of pipes. It's called dual reticulation. A couple of other names you'll see in a moment. Now I've got an arrow here. See this pipe here? External pipe that goes all the way out to the top of the reservoir and comes in from the top. What happens at Rouse Hill is that this recycled water is being fed back to the subdivision. It's about 33,000 houses. It turns out that during really hot weather, they use more recycled water than the wastewater they produce, substantially more. So it has to be topped up from the potable system. It's the sort of thing you wish you didn't have to do, but it happens here, and there's a reasons why. I'll just go through here. Major development in the early 90s. Wastewater from new residential commercial areas are treated at the new recycling plant, reticulated back by this third pipe, dual reticulation, non-potable network. Lilac is the colour for recycled water pipes. Many of you would know that. It's used for garden watering, toilet flushing, and later on in 2006, 2007, it was permitted to be used for laundry after testing, and then now veggie patches. There's always 2 metres. The excess flow to a tributary of the Cat Eye Creek. It's the Cat Eye Creek catchment. Why do they do this scheme? I think this is interesting. It was to reduce the environmental impact on Cat Eye Creek from nutrients, because we already knew in the 1990s we're getting algal blooms, blue-green algae in the Hawke's Nepean, and they knew that if this development was going to be adding more nutrient load on the Hawke's Nepean. But I know this is fact, that they knew the geomorphology was a problem in Cat Eye Creek. This scheme was going to reuse 2/3 of the wastewater. Because in hot weather, everyone wants to have recycled water in hot weather, but on a cold, wintry week in winter, no one wants the recycled water except for toilet flushing, so there is an excess that puts down the creek. So half the time you've got probably maybe half the effluents going down the creek, and then during the colder weather you've got maybe 80-90% of the effluent's going down the creek. But just to overall reduce that geomorphological load, because upstream of Rouse Hill, there was a Castle Hill sewage treatment plant, and it had done quite a lot of damage to the creek. So they knew this would be real bad. So it was for environmental purposes, to get environmental approval for rezoning the whole area to residential, along with a number of water-sensitive urban design initiatives as well in the stormwater space. Sydney Water actually manages the stormwater infrastructure at Rouse Hill, which is quite unique. It was not for water savings. The Upper Shoalhaven Dam was on the drawing board. So it was just a case of, it wasn't a case of if, it was just a case of when. Yep, we'd just be building the Upper Shoalhaven. We're not saving water. We're not doing this to save water, potable water. So Sydney Olympic Park is a scheme that was, well, Sydney Olympic Park was developed for the Sydney Year 2000 Games. And it was known as the, what sort of game, what would you label the game as? The games as? Yes, Green Games. And one of the many initiatives they did was to do a integrated water cycle management approach. Well, this is the Easter Show site. There's the main stadium, the Superdome, Kudos Bank Arena, Olympic Village, and the Aquatic Centre and some of the other features there. So this scheme was quite interesting. They had this massive brick pit, which is largely below sea level, a massive storage site. So stormwater was able to be diverted through to this and stored in this big storage area here. And they withdraw the wastewater from the sewer system, the main pumping station that's over here, from the pumping station that serves the site and the Olympic Village. And then there's a treatment plant here where they treat the wastewater to secondary level, to that biological process. They don't filter it, they do it to a secondary level. And then it's sent across to a water recycling plant over here that takes the stormwater from the pit and the wastewater, and it puts it through ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis, because there's salty water in this brick pit. They need a lot of water for irrigation, but they knew they had to deal with the salt, so they put reverse osmosis. It was the Green Games, integrated water cycle, Blackwater, stormwater harvesting together. So you've got the site, there's rain falling on the site, it's producing wastewater, the stormwater that's going through stormwater features and into the brick pit. Sewage is going to this treatment plant for secondary process, and the effluent can either be sent to storage in the brick pit, and they don't really care too much about the algae that grows from the nutrients, because, hey, it's going through this U-Butte ultrafiltration reverse osmosis plant that can take out everything. And then the recycled water gets fed back in. Now there's brine. When you see reverse osmosis desalination, there's a high concentrate stream of salty, briny water. So that gets dumped to the sewer, goes out to Malabar. Similar to Rouse Hill. They're using about, they reckon they've halved the water consumption by 50%, half the potable water. They've displaced drinking water supply by 50% by doing this scheme. They use it for firefighting. They're also using it for cooling towers. These are uses that they've been able to get approved later on in the operation of the scheme. Cooling towers can be an issue with salt, with recycled water, because most recycled water has a lot of salt in it unless you reverse osmosis. But they've got reverse osmosis, so this effluent can be used for cooling towers. And for the pool filter backwashing. So the Aquatic Centre, they actually backwash those filters with recycled water. They don't top up the pool with recycled water, but they do backwash the filters with it. Yes, so there you go, 2.3 megalitres a day. Okay, so the drivers: broader environmental sustainability, water conservation, reducing effluent discharges to waterway, the whole thing when you think of Green Games. They made connection of the cold water, the laundry cold water connection had to be compulsory plumbed to the recycled water scheme there. That was quite an issue. We'd have notice of requirements for developments in Sydney Water, and if it was within the Sydney Olympic Park area, they had to have it connected. Outside the boundary, it was a choice. Okay, this is the actual ultrafiltration reverse osmosis treatment plant. You've got the big long membranes in a tube. Looks really cool, surrounded by a wetlandy sort of thing. I drive past this all the time, and I've never noticed the actual wetland, because it's actually above your head level. This is an interesting project in that it's probably the first, it's still maybe the only of its type in the world. Has anyone heard of the Hawke's Bay Replacement Flows project? No. Southern Hemisphere's biggest recycled water project. I was directly involved with this project in sizing it and resolving some configuration issues. The Millennium Drought in 2006, someone thought, well, why don't we release 50 megalitres a day, that's 600 litres a second, from Warragamba Dam all the time, to have enough flow going down the river, so that during drought conditions you don't have salt water coming up to Richmond, and you don't have the bull sharks coming up to Windsor again. I've met people who've seen bull sharks at Windsor. And you don't have the irrigators accidentally sucking on a high tide, sucking the salt water and pumping it up onto their crops, which happened. So this is an environmental release for human use and for the river health. So someone thought, well, how about we take the wastewater from Penrith, St Mary's, Quackers Hill, put it through reverse osmosis, make it just as clean as what's being released from Warringah Dam. No one would know the difference, and we can kill a couple of birds with one stone. So in essence, you're taking the wastewater from Quakers Hill, sewage treatment plant, St Mary's, Penrith, centralised to St Mary's, where it's subjected to ultrafiltration, then reverse osmosis. So ultrafiltration is where you put the wastewater through a really fine, I'll show you in a sec, process, and then through ultrafine membranes for desalination. And so the 50 megalitres a day that they're able to produce of ultra clean water is then transferred and released into the Nepean just below the weir. So the wastewater, which is already pretty clean, it's already gone through sand filters, it's now subjected to ultrafiltration, so there's no particles to damage the reverse osmosis desalination membranes. Now about, say 80%, I think about 85% of the flow goes this way, 15% of the flow is actually transferred back through to the North Head coastal sewer system in dry weather. In wet weather, no, because the wet weather, the coastal sewer system is on overflow in wet weather. So driver, potable water is saved and environmental as well, 2 drivers, by a major reduction in nutrients in the Hawke's and Nepean catchment. Now, if you're interested in the detail on that, speak to me later, because it's fascinating what me and some other people discovered after it was implemented. Because we didn't quite get the result we expected, but still it's been a successful project. There's the outlet, there's where that pristine reverse osmosis water goes and mixes in with the Nepean river water. And has anyone heard that you're not supposed to drink distilled water? It's not good for you. Has anyone heard of that? Well, that's distilled water. Well, it kills bass in 20 minutes. So they did a fish attraction survey, just some research to find out whether there'd be an issue with the fish going up there, and they worked out that they didn't think it was going to be an issue. Platypus were found going up it, and then the platypus gets up to Penrith treatment plant and think, I don't think I belong here. So it has been successful. It does produce clean water, and yes, it has no salt in it, and yes, it did strip the cement lining of that transfer pipeline so that there's no cement lining left, but that's another story. It wasn't the only reason why the control valve at the downstream end has had to be replaced. Now, more Blackwater. Getting back to the homes, getting back to the in-house use. The Hoxton Park, the next scheme, the big scheme that came up was a big development area south of Liverpool, Hoxton Park development area. They worked out that they could feed about 14,000 homes with recycled water. We had the drought was well and truly kicked in. Basics, the water sustainability rules for new development had kicked in. Basics means a rainwater tank or recycled water. So they thought that, well, let's save drinking water because, well, desalination is way too expensive. Who'd ever do desalination back in 2003, 2004? And that's why the scheme was done. This was interesting. This drought, I worked at Sydney Water up until about 2017. I also spent some time working at the Australian Water Association earlier on. Working at Sydney Water during this time and working alongside the people who were involved in managing the drought strategy and the water conservation initiatives that Sydney Water and the government were promulgating. I've been blown away by how well the community have got on board with the water saving bandwagon. The anticipated reduction in drinking water consumption ended up being much greater than what was expected. So what happened at Hoxton Park, the new development started, they hadn't actually completed the recycled water delivery into the network. They built the network, customers were connected, and they were going to be providing the recycled water a little later on. There was a 60% reduction in recycled water demand because everyone got on board with the water saving. So at Rouse Hill, 2/3 of the wastewater was getting reused. Here, you're barely getting about 30 or 40% of the wastewater being reused. And as a consequence, they literally could not switch this system on because the cement lining on the pipes released so much lime, and it took so long for the water to go through the network, or they knew it would take so long, they wouldn't be able to maintain the chlorine residual in the pipe to make the water safe, and it would be too alkaline. So this scheme, it went about 12 to 15 years not being used for recycled water because the cost of servicing this development so distant from the existing systems was going to be cost prohibitive. So he worked for a consultancy, one of the large consultancies, many years, and he had the experience and the vision, and he was able to get together some some investors to get behind this new initiative. So this was the first one, cab off the rank. And there's other companies that are participating in this space. It's like Rouse Hill, but using an NBR plant and with some extra innovation. And this is from the Sydney Morning Herald. Okay, so it's been a successful development. Hoxton Park, what's happened since then? Well, in the 18, 20 years, there's been a bunch of other smaller schemes that were done at the same time, only about 1,000 or 2,000 houses. There's been no new ones initiated in 20 years in Sydney, but it's happened elsewhere. So let's get onto this. Okay, what's the emerging drivers? Circular water, Blackwater Re-use could play a role, whereas Sydney it sort of hasn't. This is the stuff that motivates me to try to take the baton further. Currumbin Eco Village, this village, has anyone heard of Currumbin Eco Village? It's near residential areas. They could have sort of connected to the existing sewage system. This got like basically more awards than any other development I've heard of. Got a lot of international awards. It was a true eco-village in every sense. They have to build their houses with mainly recycled materials and low energy and sort of things. So you see solar panels, both hot water and photovoltaics. No fences. There's kangaroos grazing around. So what they did here is they went fully off-grid. 147 homes and I think it's about maybe 150, maybe about 100 hectares. There's their wastewater treatment. There's the biological part of the wastewater treatment plant, below ground. This is the membranes, because they have to treat the biological process. It requires membranes, microfiltration membranes, to make it clean enough for toilet flushing, for garden watering, and compulsory connection to the laundry. In this building here, there's some chemical dosing and some membranes inside here, and the other side is a community centre. When I visited, there was kids playing on that side, and then there's the rest of it there. They've got a major storage over here too, which is covered over so algae doesn't grow. The interesting thing about this is that they chose an attached growth where the wastewater is sprayed on drapes hanging in the air rather than NBR. So this was interesting. It showed that maybe NBR is not the silver bullet. Another one, Aquarevo. This is South East Water, one of the 3 Melbourne utilities that operates as the water utilities in Melbourne. There's got 3 retail entities. There's also a headworks entity called Melbourne Water that sort of provides the bulk water to them. They wanted to showcase some innovative stuff, and they partnered with a forward-thinking developer. And this driver is to showcase all the sorts of water sustainability and water management and integrated water cycle management. They actually proactively control their rainwater tanks. So if a storm's coming, they'll automatically dump water out of people's rainwater tanks ahead of the storm, so that they can collect that peak to attenuate the storm flow. So they've got recycled water, rainwater tanks, and the treatment process they've chosen is Organica. Once again, a process chosen over NBR. It's a greenhouse. Basically, it's a greenhouse using native water-friendly aqua. Basically, it's a native aquaponic treatment plant where the roots go into the tanks where they're aerated, and there's also additional nylon strands put in there, so that the biological activity is focused on attaching to items. It's more resilient. You're not sort of pumping air and pumping lots of air to make and mix it all up to make all the bugs happen. It's attaching to a substrate, which is the trend in virtually all of the new innovations of wastewater treatment in the last 20 years. So this plant is actually under construction. I'd like to ask Lisa, do you think developers are quite happy to have houses literally right next to the NBR plants that flow systems use? Yes, so the treatment plant we saw before, Rouse Hill, typically there's a 400-metre buffer for urban development. With an NBR, you can actually, it's actually okay, and visually it looks a bit industrial. This thing, people are happy to live even right closer. It literally is sitting on one residential block, and there's a house right next door. This is, it's quite a sensitive environment down in Canberra. The water, the wastewater, there's always going to be a wastewater surplus in winter. It's going to have to go into a waterway, and this is particularly sensitive being upstream of Queanbeyan, just below the Queanbeyan River, below Goonong Dam. And the developer wanted to develop this land, and the council were keen to stimulate economic growth in the area. And so they came up with a really good solution, which takes the recycled water one step further, which is an idea that might be applicable for the Blue Mountains. So you have here is a new subdivision. They've got about 3,000 homes now. It's going to go up to 6,000, 6,500, fairly undulating. So they, just like Rousefield, wastewater goes to a treatment plant. It's treated comprehensively with an MBR process and additional membranes downstream of the MBR, just to make sure it's really as best as they can. It's one step short of desalination. And then the recycled water is fed back up into the network, and they're using it for toilet flushing and outdoor irrigation only, because you also have to have a rainwater tank here as well. The rainwater tank's connected to laundry and I believe the hot water system. So the drinking water will be to the cold water tap in your kitchen, your hand basins. But what they're doing is that because they've got lots of water sensitive urban design features, bioretention basins, wetlands, what happens in a drought? There ain't no water, it's all evaporating away. But what do we got? Got wastewater. So they actually deliberately discharge wastewater strategically through the landscape to flow down through those water sensitive urban design assets, so that they're lush and green and good to go when the next storm event comes. It's been successful. They actually have, I don't know whose idea this was, it may have even been the developers, it's volunteering to have a dedicated online water quality measuring station downstream of the development, just so they can be held personally responsible for the outcomes of the development. Taken when it's dry, see how, this must have been the summer shot, very dry around here. You can see the watering of the water sensitive urban design feature. Playing field, nice and lush, worth going out to rather than staying on a screen at home. The treatment plant still looks pretty industrial. It's quite a major, not a cheap plant, but once it's spread, the cost is spread across a large number of properties, it is likely to be affordable. The drivers are different. You might have noticed there's various reasons why water's being recycled. There's complexity. It is quite complex to produce a high grade of recycled water to get rid of all the food, the nutrients, the pathogens. At a small scale. MBR's done a pretty good job. Googong's a successful example. Because of that complexity, it's been hard to really replicate these smaller recycle schemes, and they're currently, certainly for Sydney, it's a trend towards centralised systems. But I question that, because there is variables that haven't necessarily been considered. Circular economy ideas are starting to kick in. There probably hasn't been a decent exploration of the circular economy thinking to a decentralised approach. I like the thing I'm interested in with the small scale systems I'm involved in designing and planning is using electric trucks to tanker away the solids to centralised resource recovery, because you can do it, and no one's going to bat an eyelid to a nice quiet truck drifting down the street versus a noisy, diesel powered. The economic imperative. The third pipe developments are happening in Sydney still, not by Sydney Water. Where the development wants to proceed and build a system, like Pitt-Town, Sydney Science Park is the latest one. I've been engaged to assist with that, resolving some of the technical issues on this scheme. Box Hill's the development that Flow Systems did, because the developer wanted to build, rezone and develop that area ahead of the government's urban development program. The reason why these have gone ahead of the government's official program is because Sydney Water builds the infrastructure for free for new subdivisions since 2009. What are the new drivers? Combating that heat island, making sure the vegetation is nice and lush, keeping that ground moisture in the ground. If it's not a recycled water scheme, during the dry times, the drinking water is embargoed for strictly drinking water purposes, even if you've got a rainwater tank. Uncertain weather. Resource recovery in Blackwater is now a thing. If you're at Maroubra or Randwick and you're using your gas stove, there's half a chance that gas, some of that gas, has come from food waste taken to Malabar's sewage treatment plant and fed into the digesters, and the surplus gas that they can't use for their cogeneration is then filtered and fed back into the gas network. That sort of stuff is what I'm hoping we'll see more and more of. Now, economic. Since the 1960s through till 2009, developer charges were levied on all developers in the greenfield expansion of Sydney to pay for the water and sewer infrastructure rollout, because there's never enough money from the water and sewer rates to cover that cost. But in the GFC, it was necessary to drop any of the impediments to development so that the developers could actually sell lots and get the price low enough. Those charges have been absent until 3 weeks ago. They've been reintroduced 3 weeks ago on a staged manner. That's good because it actually reintroduces the price discovery of what is a least cost solution. So the innovative solutions have been limited till now because developer charges, the infrastructure was free for the developers. But if they now have to pay, say, $30,000, $40,000 a lot, and someone can come up with a private recycled water wastewater scheme, not a drinking water scheme, private wastewater recycled water scheme, that can dramatically reduce their cost and make their subdivision nice and lush and green, greener than their competitors over the hill, they'll go to City Water and say, hey, we want to do this good thing which is cheaper. Are you okay with that? You're supposed to be okay with that. And that's what is possible, and that's what's partly driving me at the moment, because there is some more work technologically to make that even better than what it currently could be. Another driver, fire protection. Developer charges. Where's the expensive places to develop in Sydney? Do any of those look local? This is the charge they calculated back in about 15, 16 years ago, and it's just been increased by CPI. They haven't yet calculated what it really should be. I know Picton, they've recalculated that charge, that's gone up to 50,000. I don't know what Wimmera is going to be, but it depends on really what growth expectations are in the catchment. The economic aspects, we must not let go of that. I just want to add, there's been a lot of innovation in recycled water and a lot of government grants and a lot of schemes that were done when there was a lot of push to doing green buildings and that during the 2000s drought and subsequently. And a lot of things were tried. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work. And that was excellent, but a lot of them were uneconomic, especially stormwater recycling that's based on capturing storms only. For the future, we want to make sure that the environmental thing, explore how it can be done also economically, because if you've got all the planets aligned, then we can get to the destination of a much lighter touch on the planet. Firstly, we've got to make sure that the engineering economics is sorted. We saw that green field before at Googong, the nice playing field. Not allowed at Rouse Hill, not allowed, because Sydney Water is legally not allowed to sell the recycled water to Baulkham Hills Council for the 20 cents a kilolitre it costs them for electricity and extra chlorine. Cost them 20 cents, they have to sell it at $1.80, they have to sell it 90% of the potable, because them's the rules. Sydney Water's whole pricing model is based on that. It requires the minister to give a directive to do the smart thing. So what happens? Right, the playing fields tend to be dry in summer, and the effluent goes in the river with nutrients. I've raised this, it was one of the things we're trying to push while I was at Sydney Water. There were so many regulatory and policy issues that had to be dealt with that was just another one of those issues, and it was only intermittent. If there's a resurgence in looking at these sorts of things, it might get significant enough to be on the radar. But the thing is that Rouse Hill's only one small area, and there's only a handful of playing fields that this applies to. You never know. With better economics, with being able to get that wastewater being treated close to where it's being used, without having massive infrastructure taken a long, long way away to a treatment plant and then piped all the way back with all that cost, upfront cost. The default is to get the stuff off peak onto the playing field. Stinking hot day, you don't have to water the playing field when everyone else is watering their gardens and needs to water their gardens and have enough pressure. And I'm collaborating with some other companies that are active in this space, where we all need to progress this, and there's good ideas that can get traction. It's just a matter of getting the right pathway. I might just mention, so I'm particularly passionate about moving to the attached growth technologies, which is higher reliability, lower energy, small-scale wastewater treatment to enable higher grade recycled water close to where it needs to be used, and using technologies that have been developed in the last 10, 15 years. And some ideas that have not yet been used mainstream, they've only been trialled. The houses, the subdivision you saw before, where you had Rouse Hill and you had the new subdivisions where the houses are bigger and there's not much backyard. It turns out nowadays at places like Hoxton Park, new subdivisions, you don't need to top up the recycled water system with drinking water, because it turns out that the likely peak demand, this is the highest demand on the hottest day, for recycled water can be basically fully met from the wastewater produced from that subdivision. Once you go from that down to that, then it affects the whole configuration and costing of doing the urban water thing in new subdivisions. But setting aside water-sensitive urban design, which is probably even more important. Drivers for Blackwater Re-use have evolved, and they vary, interestingly. Small-scale systems, they're a factor in current trends to centralised systems. Small-scale, if you're going to do small-scale wastewater treatment, what do? Many people would know that you've got an acre blocks now. You've got an acreage block, and you've got to build a new house. Usually the council says, "I want an aerated wastewater treatment system," and that's usually just involves aerating the wastewater once it comes out of the septic tank, and then the sludge gets settled and pumped back into the septic tank. Difficult. It's doable. It's been sort of successful, but they're never really working all that well. It uses a lot of power. You've got air blowers, which are much less reliable than pumps, modern pumps. You've got suspended biological activity. Some of them do put in like plastic lattices and that now for bugs to grow on, which helps. And not much resilience to variable flows. And people putting Drano down. It needs more monitoring. There's a config for a project that I've just done some planning work on. Surprisingly expensive compared to the alternative, which is attached growth systems where you've got media and you spray the effluent onto the media, uses a lot less power. You've got a biomass growing on in this case, this is a felt system. The effluent, the bugs grow on the felt, the effluent sort of dribbles through the felt, gets filtered out. You have natural air contact, can handle if there's no power for a long time, bugs don't die, and don't have to visit as often. There's multiple technologies like this that can be used, and here's a particular config using another one using some another type of membrane, which is an Australian invention, combined with this particular American system to get a much better outcome. My understanding is that you've got Wentworth Falls Dam here, Wentworth Falls Lake. If there's fires up here and fire appliances need, whether it be trucks or helicopters, they're fighting fires here, they need to refill. To fly your helicopter 8 k's down here, fill up, and then you've got to fly back and you've got to lift that water 250 metres. I imagine the cycle time will be quite significant. Wouldn't it be lovely to be able to suck from dams around here? The project that I'm been briefed to undertake is to look into the feasibility of sewer mining and maybe adapting some of the water features here to provide a secure source of water, and also to provide, before the fires come, to provide that recycled water that can be put into the landscape here. Yeah, so irrigate, maintain pond levels. There's challenges. It's hard to reduce nutrients in wastewater at a small scale. It can sort of be done, it's expensive. So nutrients is an issue. We don't want to have nutrient water flowing into the waterways in any substantial sense. Maybe some recirculating wetlands can work. Sydney Water's done some trial wetlands at Picton Sewage Treatment Plant that gave some good results. So it's a challenge. But the opportunities, you only need these, you don't need this in winter. So you don't need to recycle this stuff in winter. And you've got advance warning of having to have it up and ready and working. It's a very different reuse perspective that I haven't heard of being faced before. So a bit of new thinking here. There's stuff that I'm not aware of that you all might have in your minds. So it'd be good to get your feedback in the next session. There's desalination that can be done here. You can desalinate wastewater so that you don't have the nutrients going into the waterways. That's also an option. I know of a particular application where there's some people who really like to have a desalination plant in winter that don't need it in summer. You need it in summer, but not in winter. There's an idea. This is one of the projects I'm currently working on, and that's full circular. That's recycling water again and again and again for toilet flushing. I'll leave it there. I'm sorry I was gone too long, but